Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chatham House. I'm Robin Niblett, the director of the Institute. My great pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon to talk about something that was always going to be a relatively contentious meeting when this was arranged a good month or so ago, which has become all the more topical in the last few weeks, a meeting on Jerusalem, a modern vision, with Nir Barkat, the mayor of Jerusalem. Chatham House has done work on Jerusalem, on Israeli-Palestinian affairs for a number of years now. And I think we recognize as much as anyone else that this is right at the center and at the heart of the question of a durable peace and stability in that part of the world. The mayor has no light task, therefore, to have to undertake since he took up his position in 2008. He had served prior to taking up his position towards the end of 2008 for 5 years on the city council, so he was well accustomed and knowledgeable of the challenges of the city prior to taking up his position as mayor. And I think I'm right in saying, Mayor, that your parents had been there some 50 years earlier in Jerusalem, so somebody who knows the city and its ins and outs particularly well. But he's somebody who's come to politics later on in his career with 20 years as an entrepreneur, somebody who ran a very successful high-tech firm in Israel, went on to create a venture capital capacity with that firm. So somebody who, as I think we'll tell from his remarks, is going to bring, let's say, a business approach as much to reform as it is one of politics. But as we well know, Mayor, separating politics and business in Jerusalem is pretty much impossible. This meeting, just to remind you all, is on the record. That's right, all the TV cameras at the back there, and all the journalists. It's on the record. And if I could please ask you all to make sure that your mobile phones are switched off and not just on buzz. And we will, after hearing the Mayor's comments, we should have a good 40 minutes for discussion and question and answer. So we'll have a good opportunity to really dig into some of these incredibly challenging issues in what is a very complex problem. So welcome to Chatham House, Mayor. Delighted to have you here, and we look forward to your remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Robin Niblett, Director of Royal Institute of International Affairs, distinguished members and guests of Chatham House. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here. What I would like to accomplish in our chat is give you a bit of wider perspective as to the vision and to the thoughts and the challenges of managing Jerusalem, and leave you with a wider perspective rather than when you entered this discussion. And with your permission, I'd like to expand a little bit about the motivation, what caused me to leave all my business and focus on Jerusalem. I was minding my own business happily ever after, doing some high-tech stuff in the global marketplace, which I spent about 20 years. And thank God, after we've done for our home, my wife and I, about 12 years ago, I decided to do some philanthropy, and we got engaged in education. We built with the Hebrew University the largest Hebrew educational website with a big portion of Arabic education website, and got engaged in the education system. That gave me a peep into public life in the city of Jerusalem. And the more I got engaged in the schooling system with the public sector, the more I realized that Jerusalem has many, many challenges. As a high-tech entrepreneur, on average I lived over Italy, spending about a week a month in the States, in North America. And I didn't really understand the depth of the challenges we have in the city. I've learned that there is negative migration of the Jewish population, negative migration of over 6,000 Jews a year from Jerusalem to the center of the country. I've learned that Jerusalem has become the poorest city in the country. I've learned that the gap between the potential of the city and the reality is increasing rather than exploiting the full potential of our wonderful city. I've learned that, think of a conflict, we have it big time. And the challenges we all have is how do we bring to Jerusalem, to the Middle East, what I've learned in high-tech is win-win strategies. The global world and high-tech, you cannot succeed if you don't develop win-win strategies. And in the Middle East, win-lose strategies is the most common practice. And I realized that after seeing all that, I could not sit aside and continue my own business. So I retired from all my business activities 7 years ago. I work for a shekel a year. It's costing me an arm and a leg. And all of my efforts and energy is focused on one thing, and how to create a better Jerusalem for the benefit of Jerusalemites and the benefit of the world. A few remarks about Jerusalem. Our history is not controversial. 3,000 years of history in Jerusalem is practically an agreed upon fact. 1,000 years of Jewish history, 2,000 years of different conquerors of Jerusalem. Anywhere you put a shovel in the ground, you will find Jewish roots. Jerusalem is mentioned in the Bible 663 times. And the relationship and the contact between Jews and Jerusalem is second to nothing. We also know that Jerusalem is an important city for over 3.4 billion of faith throughout the world. The three monotheistic religions: Christians, Muslims, and Jews. We know that Jerusalem, besides being an historical holy city, has a huge potential, both for culture, spiritualism, education. Jerusalem, when I walk the streets and talk to people in the world and say that I'm from Jerusalem, even before I was mayor, people's eyes open up and say, oh, apologetically, this is a place I would like to visit at least once in my life. And when you compare, and when you look at the situation in Jerusalem today, we are about 800,000 residents. 1/3 of the residents are Muslims, 2% Christians, and 65% Jewish. Plus minus third, 2/3 of population. The increase of the Arab population is faster than the Jewish population. In the last 15 to 20 years, the Arab population grew from 30% to 35%, which is fine. There's room in Jerusalem for everybody. This is generally the picture we're entering, and now with your permission, and I'd be happy to expand more in the Q&A, I'd like to share with you my vision for the city of Jerusalem. As a matter of fact, it's returning the role Jerusalem played 2,000 and 3,000 years ago to the front of the table. Jerusalem was a destination for pilgrims from all religions, the center of the world, where modern civilization practically started. Jerusalem has that potential. And if we compare the number of people visiting the city, and I'm as an entrepreneur, I look at the gap and I say, wow, there's a huge opportunity for scaling and building the city of Jerusalem. If New York had 48 million tourists, and I think London has over 20, and Rome had 40, there's no reason why Jerusalem only has just over 2 million tourists a year. And one of the challenges we have is to open up Jerusalem for the benefit of the world, to open up its economy, to expand freedom of religion. Right now, in the 42 years of United Jerusalem, there's never been a better freedom of religion to all religions in Jerusalem. As a matter of fact, the only religion that is limited are the Jews, that are not allowed to pray on Temple Mount. We must with lots of spine, protect the ability for people to practice their religion in the city of Jerusalem. But that's not enough. I want to open it up and enable many, many more tourists and pilgrims to come to the city of Jerusalem. I put a goal, 10 million tourists in a decade from now. 10 million tourists is equivalent of 140,000 new jobs. It means sending 10 million ambassadors of the city of Jerusalem to the world. It's sharing Jerusalem with people, not only the 800,000 residents. By the way, when people understand the strategy, it's a win-win strategy. When it rains on everybody. Part of the job force in culture and tourism are Arabs and Jews. When people understand that it's boosting their economy, they play ball. Carrots and economy is the best way to promote the city of Jerusalem and the Middle East in general. I strongly believe and know that everywhere there's economic growth, people have more to lose, they become calmer. When the economy is poor, people become more radical. So part of the solution and part of the derived vision that I shared with you is making Jerusalem a better place to live, to visit, to open a business. That's the Jerusalem people want to hear. That's the Jerusalem we have to develop. I'm focusing on the common theme, the common denominator of people. People ask me what's harder, to develop relationship between Jews and Arabs or between Jews and themselves. Well, I believe it's more difficult to align interests between the Jews and themselves and Arabs themselves and Christians themselves than sometimes to seek win-win between the different groups. There are 31 council members in the city of Jerusalem. 30 of them are in my coalition. In the coalition we have ultra-Orthodox, national religious, and secular. We have left-wingers and right-wingers. And it works. When you come with transparency, I've opened up all the committees. No surprises. The strategy I shared with you is part of the coalition agreement. We seek win-win deals and slowly but gradually build trust between the different sectors in the city of Jerusalem that did not trust each other in the past. When I was head of opposition, it wasn't this case. And it's extremely important for me to slowly but gradually build trust between the different parts of Jerusalem and to work together to create 1 + 1 = 3. Jerusalem indeed is a microcosmos of what is happening not only in Israel, in the Middle East and maybe even beyond. And I am sure that by getting these wheels to move together and to work together better is the only way that Jerusalem will ever work in a better way. In terms of the planning process in Jerusalem is quite challenging, to say the least. There's shortage of land. We are a city that has patches upon patches about plans for thousands of years. There are 3,000 buildings for preservation in such a small area. We have modern, we have ancient, we have a need to expand the infrastructure for tourism, for the benefit of the world. It does not exist as it should to this point in time. And there are needs for residential areas, there's need for businesses, for culture. We need many schools, we're lacking public buildings. All of these have to go into one planning process. We anticipate Jerusalem to grow to be 1 million people in 2030. The master plan for the city of Jerusalem that has been worked on for about a decade, started off with Mayor Olmert, and then Mayor Lupliansky and myself. It's converged to think through how to allocate all the needs that are derived from the public and what I've shared with you right now into one master plan. And we anticipate building 50,000 apartments to catch up with the need of moving from 800,000 people to 1 million people. And the plan is a natural expansion of Arab neighborhoods for Arabs and Jewish neighborhoods for Jews. The macro plan calls for about a third of the buildings and the apartments to be planned for the Arab sector in Jerusalem and 2/3 for the Jewish sector in Jerusalem. Mind you, that under Israeli law, and I believe under any modern democratic law, you cannot force people or stop people buying apartments and houses by their race or by their color or by their religion. And in Jerusalem, there's no problem. People can live wherever they want. Arabs can live in Jewish neighborhoods. Jews can live in Arab neighborhoods. It's perfectly fine, and I believe that you will accept. If you don't have double standards, and there's one standard in the world, you must accept that equality by law. And indeed, when we plan the different neighborhoods, we plan them anticipating that most people would like to live next to the people that they're similar, but under law, people have the right to live anywhere they want. We are not in the business. As mayor of Jerusalem, I'm not in the business of blocking or telling people where to live. The planning committees in the city of Jerusalem have to be equal by law and enable people to build according to what we anticipate are the holistic needs of the people of the city of Jerusalem, and as I said earlier, not only the residents of the city of Jerusalem, but the world as a whole that cares and thinks about the future of the city. I come from the private sector, and I have to tell you with hand on my heart that there are gaps. There are planning gaps in all parts of the city of Jerusalem. One of the reasons why Jews migrate out of the city is lack of affordable housing. In East Jerusalem, some of the neighborhoods were not planned properly, and there's a big gap between the plan and reality, which forces us to replan some of the areas for the benefit of the Arab residents. We understand those gaps, and I'm totally committed, leveraging my skills as a business entrepreneur, to catch the bull by the horn, focus on areas, on fulfilling gaps that have been caused in the last few decades, and turning Jerusalem into a place that is better for tourists, better for investors, better for its residents. I strongly believe that by developing Jerusalem in such a strategy, a win-win philosophy, is the best future for the city of Jerusalem. When you bear all that in mind, and you understand all these needs, you understand why Jerusalem has to stay united. You know, there's not a history of one city in the world split that ever worked. Understanding the needs of the different sectors of the city and the role that Jerusalem must play, it has to stay united, and we have to focus, rather than on the division, we have to focus on the whole. My recommendation to the administration, to the US administration, and to the European Union, don't come to the Middle East, to Jerusalem with sticks. Come with carrots. What I'm doing in many areas that I'm planning in the city of Jerusalem, I'm proposing how to increase the pie, how to make 1 + 1 = 3, how to make things work better. When you come with sticks, you will not get your way in Israel, and in the Middle East. You will eventually, rather than come with a win-lose, zero-sum game strategy, come with a win-win strategy, make the whole city work better as a whole, everyone wins. When you focus on the division, on the differences, there are many, many sub-segments and sectors in the city of Jerusalem. Do you know that the word Yerushalayim in Hebrew comes from the root of Shalem? Shalem is whole. If there's one city in the world that has to work as a whole, that's Jerusalem. If there's one city in the world that making it work better for the benefit of all its residents can make an impact on the world, that's the city of Jerusalem. I'm very optimistic, I have to admit, and people ask me, how's it in the first year of office? Just over a year. What I find is that there's high acceptance to the strategy of win-win by the public officials, the elected members of the council. There is high acceptance by the public servants in the municipality. We are in the process of upgrading many, many plans for the city of Jerusalem. I've changed priorities. Last summer, we broke all records in terms of culture events. There's positive momentum in the city of Jerusalem in terms of business opportunities. There's growth of 30% in new business recommendations and proposals by young entrepreneurs. And I'm totally committed to make our economy work much better for the benefit of all the people. A few words about the peace process, and then I'll sum it up and enable you all to ask questions. My recommendation, and it starts with our history. I don't know if you remember that on all prior negotiations between Israel and Palestinians, never was Jerusalem an obstacle. Never. In all negotiations, while there were negotiations between Palestinians and Israelis, Jerusalem kept on building for the benefit of all residents. My recommendation is don't demand a freeze in the city, because that itself is an obstacle and undermines peace. From my perspective, we have to push Israel and push the Palestinians with carrots and not with sticks. I call the US administration and I call the European Union to focus on win-wins and not win-lose. The process that is now developed, I think, is perceived, definitely in Israel, and eventually by the Palestinians, as a process that pushes us to do a bad deal, and nobody wants that. I strongly believe we need peace in the region. I strongly believe in negotiations with the Palestinians. We have our red lines. Mustn't take any obstacle for discussion of peace the same way, exactly the way it was in the past. There's many things I could tell you, but I prefer to stop here, and I'll be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nir Barkat, for those comments. You raised a number of topics. I think perhaps amongst the most important at the beginning, commenting that Jerusalem is a city that in a way has been in crisis, the poorest city, immigration, a number of internal problems, therefore, in terms of its viability as a city in recent years. A city that at the same time, as we all know, and you can tell by the audience that's come to join us here today, is an absolute focal point for communities, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, but also others around the world who are interested in peace and security in general, not just between Arabs and Israelis. Your point, though, as well, of the huge potential of the city of Jerusalem, how it could be achieved, your particular vision for how to achieve it. And then you came into the issue of the planning process, the need to expand infrastructure from your perspective for Jerusalem to flourish as a city as a whole. But obviously this being at the heart of the contentious issue right now, and I think this was linked into your final comment about your view of the peace process, that in a way a bad deal is not going to be a deal that is accepted from an Israeli perspective, and that therefore mixing in the settlement issue within Jerusalem as part of this peace process, from your perspective, is one that's just not going to be successful. We have a healthy amount of time, a good 35 minutes or so, to enter into questions and answers. Let me take the privilege of the chair to ask you one slightly provocative question. You said that there is great transparency now in the system that you've brought to Jerusalem, a transparency that wasn't there before. But were you aware in advance then of the settlement decision, the 1,600 homes that were announced at that point during Biden's visit? Was this something that you were aware of at that time? Because I think transparency obviously is actually at the heart of the process there.
Well, I'll answer in a few folds with your permission. First of all, it wasn't municipality, it was government. In the government process, it went to the district committee. And I'd like to share with you how the process flows. You start with the local committee of planning, where the municipality proposes a plan. We do that with 50,000 apartments. And then we come up with a plan, and there's discussion, and people can comment and go to court. And it's a process that is practically very similar to what happens here in London. And then the second phase is after people object, and their objections are heard, they can go to li'irur, how do you say, for a second up higher. Then we finish the local committee, you go to with bigger plans, you go to the district committee. That plan is put in place in Ocean, people can comment, can object, and then that same process goes with the district committee, and if people don't like it, they go to the national. So that process takes years, especially in a city like the city of Jerusalem. It's all transparent in the way that it's put in the public eye. So the reality is, it is as straightforward and open as one could think. Nobody thought that it's a problem, because the Israeli government didn't say that there's freezing in the city of Jerusalem. And the public figures that are working there, it's just a process. They go through. The same week we approved 1,000 new apartments, potentially, in the city of Silwan. So what's the problem? And so I agree that because of the sensitivity, it could have been wiser to wait a bit. And nobody, definitely not, I know the people, nobody would like nor to insult or to put a stick in the wheel of the negotiations. But the key question is If you're hinting that this should be a total freeze, the answer is no. There's no freeze. If you're talking about being polite and wait a week or wait a bit, because in the middle of negotiations, that's fine. We should be honest and fair with our partners in the United States and in the European Union. So the point is that there's full transparency. Nobody meant any harm. People are continuing to plan the city for the benefit of the residents. And, it's a bit, nobody likes the situation we went into. But, it's not a strategic fault. It's a tactical, impolite thing that happened that the Prime Minister didn't know about, I didn't know about. It's the committee that went about doing their own thing, but derived from the plan everyone agrees upon. So,
I was trying to work out at which stage, and I think you've answered my question, at which point the Jerusalem municipality was aware as opposed to the district as opposed to the national.
It passed the municipality.
Yeah, this was at the national level that the call was finally made. Let me open it up. I'm sure there are many other questions people will ask. Let me take a few faces. I see them. I'm going to start with the young man in the white shirt there, and I go to the lady behind, and I'll come and take some here. If you could please... Yep, man with the white shirt right there. Thank you.
Paweł Kupis, Chatham House member. Do you think that Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a failure of international law?
What's that again?
Is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict a failure of international law? We might think of some ways of interpreting that question. There are many ways of interpreting it, but we can come to that in a minute. There's a lady behind you. Let me just take two to start with, so you have two to consider here. And I might put a writer on that question. Mm-hmm.
A few questions about numbers.
So say who you are, please.
Sorry, my name is Daphne Brown from Global Radio News. You mentioned that 6,000 Jewish constituents leave Jerusalem every year. Do you mind telling us how many Palestinian of your constituents leave due to the silent transfer policy of the Israeli government and municipality? You were talking about equality in planning. If you don't mind telling us the names of the new Palestinian neighborhoods that are going to be set in Jerusalem during your tenure. What are you planning, and how many housing units are going to be built in them?
Let's stop with those two.
How many places of employment in East Jerusalem, please? Thank you.
Okay, that's a fair question. When we tell it, because you've got two or three questions actually in that one. International law, I wonder how you want to...
I'm not sure I understood the question. If you don't mind expanding a little bit, because...
Do you want to expand on it? Or when you say it's a failure of international law, what do you mean by a failure of international law? Let's pass the microphone back, because I don't want to interpret it for you. I will if you... No.
For example, international community does not recognize Jerusalem as a capital state, a capital city of Israel. But Israel, in its domestic law, recognized it as a capital city.
Yeah, and that's what I thought might be the question, because obviously it therefore means that the courts can rule in a way under Israeli law in ways that are not recognized then in international law.
Well, I think that there's a difference between the West Bank and Jerusalem from Israeli perspective. Israeli law applies in all of Jerusalem, all metropolitan city of Jerusalem, on all its borders. When people ask me about annexation, and I said, annexation from whom? From the Jordanians? The British before? Look at the list of conquerors of the city of Jerusalem. May it be before that, Ottomans, the Mamluks, the Crusaders, the Muslims, the Romans. And 2,000 years ago, it was 1,000 years Jewish. And by the way, nobody claimed Jerusalem as their capital but the Jewish people until recently. Nobody claimed Jerusalem as their capital. Now, I have no problem, on the contrary. The Bible, practical logics, and definitely my belief is that we have to treat all people honestly and fairly under law. And right now, Jerusalem is part of Israel, and hopefully it will stay like this forever. And we have to be very honest with all our residents in the city. And so my answer to you is, this is the law. And nobody's claiming that we should return it to Jordan or to Britain or to anybody else. And we have a right to it, if much more than anybody else. Much more than anybody else, both historically and practically.
To stay on that before we get to the issue of the Palestinian immigration as well as the Israeli immigration. But do you think it was a wise idea then? Maybe it's an unfair question to ask you, but I'm not an expert on the Middle East. Was it a wise thing to make Jerusalem then the capital? No one else claimed it. Perhaps that was a good thing, given the fact, as you said, that it's such a touchstone for the three monotheistic faiths. And therefore, for one faith to claim it as its capital perhaps causes the type of problem that we're existing in now.
Well, I mentioned that Jerusalem is mentioned in the Bible 663 times. Correct me if I'm wrong, no time, 0 in the Quran. Everyone can come and claims, which I accept that we have to be better in serving all the residents. By the way, the problem serving West Jerusalem is as severe as East Jerusalem, and people are forgetting that. We have a number of objective problems. So I think that generally we have a right, both historically and practically, more than anybody else. And by coming in and demanding these demands, I personally think it's unacceptable.
And so just to turn to those questions, let me make sure I will come to everyone else in a minute. About how many Palestinians are leaving. You mentioned the 6,000 or so leaving a year of Jewish. What's your sense of the figures on the other
Let me share with you. People are not aware of the numbers. The reason there's growth in the Palestinian, the Arab residents in the city of Jerusalem is because of practical economics. I think I mentioned it, the average income of Jews is $16,000 a year in Jerusalem. And in the center of the country, it's $24,000 a year. And you can understand why the job market, the quality of life in the center of the country is more attractive, and Jews migrate out. By the way, 18,000 migrate out, 12,000 migrate in. It's a net negative migration of 6,000. Arabs in East Jerusalem, in Jerusalem in general, the average income is about $4,000, but in the West Bank it's about $800. There's no reason to migrate out of Jerusalem. If anything, people migrate into Jerusalem because they improve their quality of life. So it depends what you compare to what. The reality is that as mayor of all residents, and I treat the ones that voted for me, the ones that voted against me, and the ones that didn't vote in the same perspective, and I have to improve people's quality of life. The vision I shared with you is improving all quality of life. Now you asked me about neighborhoods. Then generally all the new expansions are straightforward expansions of current neighborhoods. And we have a list and the plan, and if you'd like you can go and look at those plans on the net. The plan, the macro plan.
How many neighborhoods, how many houses?
I said, 70 out of 50,000, over 17,000 apartments are perceived to be for the expansion of Arab neighborhoods. What I've done just in Silwan, it's a neighborhood that you're allowed to build 2 stories. And from the 657 buildings in Silwan, 50% are over two stories. So we have about over 300 of them have gone beyond the limit. What I've done is rather than hit our head against the wall, we've now approved going up to 4 stories. That automatically enables in the same neighborhood to add 1,000 new apartments or to expand 1,000 new apartments for better quality of life. And we are now putting the infrastructure to enable much better service to get all the Arabs that live in Silwan a proper license. That on its own is an act of expanding the current neighborhood. And then we have Arab Sawakhe and others that sometimes the Arabs came up with a plan that I'm blessing. In Arab Sawakhe, it's a plan developed by some of the residents there. They came up to the municipality. I saw the plan 2 months ago, 3 months ago, and we're going to approve it. It's part of the macro plan. In areas of, in many areas of the city, and check us out. You will see that I'm dead serious in terms of fulfilling the strategy and enabling Jews and Arabs to expand and live in Jerusalem in a better quality of life. And if you like, the list is long. You'll be able to see it on the net. I'm telling you, I'm standing behind the strategy. 50,000, a third are for Arabs.
First the gentleman here, and I'm going to go to the lady there and the person there. First here. And I'll come to this side next.
Thank you. Sean Curtin, a Chatham House member. Mr Mayor, I could feel your enthusiasm and obviously your passion about the city. and your desire for win-win solutions. But I think that many people in this room believe that the real win-win situation would be if you could have peace, genuine peace. And you talk of Jerusalem as a unified city, and I can see that that's something passionate that you feel and believe. But could you ever conceive of sharing sovereignty? Rather, you could still have a unified Jewish state, still have a unified Jerusalem, but you could share sovereignty with it. And if I may, a second question on the Silwan district. You mentioned that several times. Why is it that the Palestinians, we read in our newspapers, are complaining about the demolition or the proposed demolition of about 70 houses for the King's Park project? Thank you.
I think two questions worth taking. They're very specific ones, especially the first one.
We've learned our history. Israelis saw what happened in Gaza. Pulled out of Gaza, and you got thousands of rockets on your head. There are certain things from the near and past future, there are certain risks that we're willing to take. Jerusalem, we're not willing to take that risk. It would be the most strategic risk for Israelis, and I would strongly recommend government not to go that route. You know, there's a difference between being wise and smart. A wise man knows how to get out of situations. Smart man doesn't get into situations that causes trouble. And I think that we should be very smart here and not enter a deal that we know will never work. Sovereignty cannot be shared. Sovereignty is who manages the city, who develops it, and you have to be very honest and fair to all residents and differentiate between the two. The strategy is to open up the city for the benefit not only of the residents, for all religions, for all people of faith in the world. That's the direction we have to take the city of Jerusalem. We got to be considerate as much as you can, but don't take risks. And sovereignty in the city of Jerusalem, from my perspective, is crossing a red line.
Sovereignty works in Rome.
Well,
Shared sovereignty, you've got the Vatican.
Do you think that the Middle East is Rome? You have to learn your history. It's not exactly the same country. It's not the same environment. Look, I understand why. I come from win-win strategies, and most of my training, my business career, is in is in the Western world. And it's very difficult for the people in the Western world to understand win-lose strategies. If you come with in game theory, it's well known that if you approach a deal win-win, you're looking for a give and take, and the other party, say I, come with a win-lose strategy, you will always lose. You'll always lose because whatever deal you come up with is the beginning of the next phase of negotiations. And the Middle East works very different than in Europe. What seems to work very reasonably in Europe doesn't necessarily, in this case, work in the Middle East in a different environment. It's like the rules are different. I wish that we can get there one day and end up, and I believe we can. But don't rush into bad deals.
And the old city itself specifically, I mean, rather than Jerusalem as a whole in terms of sharing sovereignty, what are the best plans to deal with the holy sites in particular within the old city?
Well, the old city today is full of people. By the way, you go to the old city and you will find so many people of different faith enjoying and practicing their religion. We just had Ramadan, the Arab holidays. Over 100,000 Arabs came to the Temple Mount freely, no problem at all, when there's no security threats. The next month, we had the Jewish holidays, and hundreds of thousands of people came to the way to Western Wall. And we have Christians flowing in and out of all parts of the old city. Today, Jerusalem is enjoying freedom of religion, lots of tourism, and we have very good growth. As to demolitions, King's Garden, I don't know if you know what is happening in King's Garden. I've proposed, we put out the plan. The reality is as follows. King's Garden is the valley, in the Kidron Valley, which is the closest to the Temple Mount. If there's any park, green area, that is more strategic than the one closest to the Temple Mount, I don't know of one. Think Hyde Park, think Central Park, think of a park, a green area around the old city. Thousands of years, It was never built on. It was a green area, and by law, nobody's allowed to build there. That special area on the Kidron Valley. That specific area is where King Solomon wrote the Song of Songs, and at the time of the Bible, they took out water from the Silwan spring and made census to the Temple Mount. It has strategic value as is. We have air photos going back to 1918 showing that nothing was built there. In 1967, where Jerusalem was reunited, there were 4 buildings at the bottom left side, southwest side of King's Garden. And in 1992, after the Jerusalem municipality fixed the sewage, the running sewage under the ground, all of a sudden there was a flow of illegal buildings coming down from Silwan and built illegally. There are court orders to demolish those houses. By Israeli law, it's a green area. You're not allowed to build there. Now, when I entered my office, I had 3 choices. The first choice, demolish the mall according to the law. I don't think it's a good idea. The other choice is to leave it as a slum, the way it is right now. I don't think it's a good idea, because it was never planned as a residence area. So what I've done is I've thought out of the box, taken the architect, the chief architect of the municipality, and thought of how to develop a better plan for the benefit of the residents. And what we developed is a plan of reviving the water. Take the water from the spring of the Shiloach, run it down in open water in the Kidron Valley. And now take the area, and on the Kidron Valley, on the east side, open up stores, restaurants, and on the road right next to it, open up, generally take 3,000 square meters of restaurants and stores for the benefit of the Arabs. It's all Arabs, there are no Jews there. And to enable them to make a better living and turn that, excuse me for saying, slum, not worthy for many people to live in, to a high quality, green area, park open for all, with running water, stores, and on the top level, on second and third floors of that area, to enable all of the illegal residents that live there today to live properly in a new apartment. By design, no evictions. By design, strategic upgrade of quality of life, and winning a park which can turn and can become an anchor for tourists and for people to come and enjoy. That's the plan. And by the way, the Arabs that live there understand that, and they're willing to negotiate. And I'm willing to negotiate. The Prime Minister asked me to delay putting the plan in the pipe, in the process, so that we can have more negotiations with the residents. I'm all fine for that, because I want this to become a successful area. Interestingly enough, the extremists on both sides are not happy with this. The extreme right will tell us, why are you giving Arabs a green area that was not allowed to build on? Why are you enabling them to build in a new neighborhood and become successful? And the extreme left are saying, if the Arabs are going to be happy, that may mean strategic impact on the sovereignty of the city of Jerusalem. And so you find extremists of the left and on the right pushing people not to make this successful deal. We will make this happen for the benefit of the residents. And now, there are 22 houses on the left side, the west side, and 66 houses on the east side, on the right side. And our notion is how to do a wise deal so that everyone that has a permit on the right side will somehow have to take responsibility on their neighbor, which is usually family, on the left side. So generally, once this park becomes an open park for benefit of all people, better economics, and no evictions because people could live there, yes, that means that eventually we'll have to clear 22 of the houses that are illegal currently, and we were going to upgrade their quality of life 20, 30 meters on the right.
Thank you for that. That's a very clear answer. And there was a lady waiting here in the middle. This was Eve, madam? Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Hold on, there's a microphone coming, and then there was a lady back there after you, sorry, which I now see your hand again. Sorry, there's a lot of hands going up. I've got a full monitor. I've got you.
I'm Jill Hamilton, and you were talking about...
Keep the microphone close to your mouth, please, if you could. Thank you.
I'm Jill Hamilton, and you were talking about the sewage pipe in the Kidron Valley. 2 years ago, when we last checked, all the sewage from East Jerusalem was going down into the Kidron Valley at the bottom of Gethsemane and directly into the Dead Sea. Now, you're talking about tourist expansion. I do not understand how the tourism for Jerusalem can be catered for when the streets in the old city are so narrow. You can hardly walk down the narrow streets and the alleys for tourists going there now. If you're walking in the opposite direction, you'll be crushed. I don't understand how you can get the tourists there when the road going from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem is so jammed up with traffic, it's so narrow. And just generally, if you go near Gethsemane in the morning, there are 50 buses parked up on the hill. They've dropped the tourists there at the top of the Mount of Olives. They walk down, and then there is a traffic jam that people can't get past.
Very specific point, too. I'm going to let you take that because it's a follow-on from the other one, and we'll move on off the planning issues. I'm going to go to the lady back there in a minute. Go ahead. Pass the microphone back there, please, madam. Do you want to take this quickly? Is this a specific issue?
Well, I actually,
open it up a bit.
I'm happy you raised this point. Rather than push people for a bad deal, the world could get involved in projects like this. I'm fully aware of the challenges of upgrading the city to be able to cope with the huge potential. You mentioned the Kidron and the running sewage. You're right. We are now in the process of, it's a disgrace. I agree with you. And in order to fix it, we need a plant that, how do you say, redoes, reuse, and we have to do that jointly with the Palestinian Authority. Because there's a reasonable chance that the sewage, by the way, doesn't discriminate. Eventually it goes to the same place, and we have to make sure that the sewage of all the residents, both Israeli and Palestinians, eventually we want to catch it at the bottom and fix it for all. So projects like this that can get the European Union, the Americans, and Israelis and Palestinians to work together, that's a classic example. Now, traffic. Don't envy me. The upgrades we have to do on the traffic to cope with the challenge is huge. We're now busy articulating the changes that we want to do for public transportation, and everything that you mentioned, I unfortunately agree with you. It's a big challenge in managing the city. And that is one of the challenges that we have to think on all of the needs of the city in order to make it work as a whole. You're 100% right. I fully agree with the challenge.
Draw in some other questions. First, the lady waiting there. Then I'm going to come to this side of the room.
Yep. Thank you. Rada Karmi, University of Exeter. Mr. Barkat, the vision you have and the reality that you're describing about Jerusalem, I have to be honest with you, I don't recognize. I know Jerusalem, and I know Silwan, and I haven't met any happy Palestinians in Silwan who are looking forward to their houses being demolished to make room for a park. My question to you, there are several questions really, I wish I had time. My question to you, first of all, is the question of international law. I think a colleague there raised it, and I wasn't quite certain how you dealt with that. Maybe you could tell us again, how do you deal with international law? Because, you know, according to international law, which we believe in, the world, thank God, has got a system of laws that we all have to live by. Now, how do you, I don't understand what you understand by international law, because, of course, under international law, everything you are describing on the eastern side of the city is illegal. The housing projects, the settlements, they are all illegal. Clearing houses lived in by Palestinians is illegal. So I don't understand. Do you recognize international law? Two very quick things. Forgive me. You mentioned, but they really have to be. Sorry, I mean I really have to.
Give us the two other questions. Don't apologise. Just get them out.
I know. I have to point this out because it's really I can't believe anybody here. Well, perhaps there are people here who share your vision. But in question of freedom of worship, what freedom of worship is it when Palestinian men below the age of 50 cannot enter the city to go to their holy places. For 40 years, people cannot go from the West Bank except with extraordinary difficulty and permits to get into Jerusalem for this freedom of worship. Okay. And the two final very important points is the question of the archaeology which you have not mentioned. How do you explain that the archaeological digs taking place, particularly under Silwan, which are endangering the top layer of houses, endangering, and in some cases there's been a couple of collapses. This has been given to an extremist Jewish fundamentalist organization which is digging with a clear partisan agenda. How do you justify that? And very finally,
she's asking questions for everyone here.
Please,
but go on, yeah.
justify the house demolitions that are threatened to take place. Please justify them.
Those were a lot of questions. But why don't we see if we can take a few of those? Because I think actually the international law had been touched, but let's touch it again. But I think these other points about freedom of worship and the archaeological sites in particular you hadn't addressed before.
Okay, well, first of all, Israeli law applies. Which law do you propose, if not Israeli law at this point? Jordanian, British?
Well, there isn't a United Nations law.
There's no such thing.
For managing countries.
To the best of my knowledge, there's no such thing. And right now, the Israeli law applies and hopefully will continue to apply. It's based, by the way, on the British law, not French, not others, which I think is proper law. The jurisdiction system in Israel is perceived to be much, much more honest and fair than others. And the courts in Israel are independent. Believe me, it's not easy to deal with the courts sometimes, and we respect them. And for that perspective, there is Israeli law, and I don't see any problem with it. As to excuse me,
American wishes.
What do you mean?
Allies' wishes.
But there's not law again. Let's come back to it in a second. Just come back to it.
In terms of people entering the Temple Mount. Restrictions happen when there's tension and when there's the police, it's a police limitation when they feel that there's risk of riots. It happens only when there's tension and it's not by law. And I think that wisely they use it. I know the head of police in the city of Jerusalem. He doesn't like to use it a lot. He uses it only when he feels that there's threat of riots and threat of life. The reality is you will see more than not that it's totally free ability to come. In the last few weeks, I have to say that there were claims in the air that Israel wants to take over the Temple Mount, and that we're going to run into Temple Mount and change the status quo. It's exactly the opposite. We are very strictly maintaining status quo, both the municipality and the Israeli government. And that's just a rumor that has no base to it. But still, people came and rioted because of this reason. And the police limited the number of people. When you limit the age to 50, then the chances of having riots dramatically decreases. And I think it's perfectly fair in managing a city so complex like Jerusalem to decrease the chances of having riots. Now, in terms of archaeology, have you been to the city of David before?
I've been to Silwan.
Okay. So the city of David is just south of the wall, south of the Temple Mount. Digging in underneath the layers, you find the real city of David. And you go with the Bible in your hand into these digs, and you see the Bible open up. Yes. And by the way, it's not controversial that when you walk into these areas and you see the Bible on that little hill, and history tells you that the real city of David, the old city of Jerusalem, was south of the Temple Mount. Now, all of the digging are approved by the Israeli archaeology, the ministry, and none of it is, extremist. It's all done under the supervision of the Israeli government, the municipality, and you're welcome and go and see it. The 500,000 people that went to see it last year, and when people go and see it, they're amazed to see the history unfold in an area that was Jewish 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. The last finding, by the way, is not only the pool where people used to purify before they go to the Temple Mount, but the actual steps leading to the Temple Mount 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. And the amount of archaeology found in that little hill in a week is more than what people find in the world in a year. And that archaeology is open for all, for people to visit. Indeed, on the top of the mountain, some of the on the top tier, some people live, both Jews and Arabs. And it's a challenge how to continue digging such an area and not hurt anybody. And since I've been there, I see the precautions taken by the archaeology and the government. I think it's honest and fair. And I'm very happy, by the way, if you're asking me, that history is unfolding right in front of our eyes. House demolitions. It's another point. I don't know how many demolitions have happened here in London and in any average city. First of all, most demolitions are because people built illegally. There's no demolition that doesn't go through courts. All demolitions go through the courts and usually up to Supreme Court in the Israeli government, which eventually people have to obey the law. Now I have to tell you that people believe that there's between 10 to 20,000 illegal buildings in Jerusalem, mainly in the east side. Still, demolitions in Jerusalem are done under law. Last year, the average is about 100 demolitions that they go through all the process of the legal courts. 40% are on the west side of the city and 60% are on the east side of the city. And the reality is that every time there is a demolition, we'll only look for the hard cases of people that built in the middle of a green area, in an area of a school, in an area that are not allowed to build at all. And Silwan is a good example of 658 houses that right now we are in the verge of making changes so that 97% of the houses will be able to get a license, and only what is over 4 stories will have to shave their building, and there are 20 buildings like that. One Jewish, by the way. And so what we're doing, we're trying to apply reasonable law and make sure people obey the law. And if I'm not mistaken, just a while ago here in London, the municipality evicted about 2,000 apartments for the benefit of the Olympics. And even if it's legal, sometimes when there's no better plan for the city, it's perfectly fair to move people from their place of residence in order to gain a bigger gain for the city and for the benefit of the city itself. So demolitions is something done in every city I know. It's part of making sure people obey the law. The average of about 100 demolitions, both in west and east, is under law. No politics in it. All under law. When people exaggerate and disobey the law. That's how I explain it.
Let me grab 2 questions here in the corner, and then we're already at 5:30, so I know we're going to run over time. So I'm going to take the gentleman waiting patient in the corner, and then the gentleman with the hat on.
Bernard Herman, a member of Chatham House. Whilst Jerusalem is clearly at the heart of a conflict between Israel and Palestine, it is also it seems to me, the heart of a conflict between the ultra-Orthodox Jews and the mainstream. Whilst you referred to your coalition as having different constituents within the Jewish community, with the impact of ultra-Orthodox demographic growth and their non-Western lifestyles, that will surely constrict the tax base by which you have to operate within your own city and will act as a deterrent to mainstream Israeli entrepreneurs such as yourself moving into the city and creating jobs. Would you care to say something about that?
Yeah.
Well, let me group a last set of questions together. Gentleman waiting there.
Hi, I'm a student at LSE. I have a question about the U.S.-Israel relationship. Do you think that the relationship is at a low point? And how do you respond to U.S. demands to stop building in East Jerusalem? What negotiations do you see taking place?
And I want to make sure that I'm going to take that. One other person been waiting for a long time, and I apologise for those others, but I'm going by the faces I first saw. Sorry, I'm taking some for each section as well. Last question there, and then I need to add 2 points which have not been touched. I want to make sure they get asked. Yeah.
Justin Alexander from the Economist Intelligence Unit. Mr. Mayor, can I ask you about the municipal budget? One of the issues that people point at, and indeed this Chatham House report connected to this event draws on it when they talk about the Judaization of Jerusalem is the share of the municipal budget spent on Jewish and Arab areas. And I think the Chatham House report says, and maybe this is 2008 figures, something like 12% of the budget is spent on a third of the residents. And I think there's a report which says that actually it may be lower than that from the EU. How do you explain that? Why has that happened in the past? And what are you doing to try and change that? Thank you.
If I can indulge in people's patience, because the Mayor has kindly said he's got a few extra minutes, so we can. And I'm going to put two last questions because they have issues that haven't been touched on yet. He'll give his answers as quickly as he can for those who need to get off. If anyone needs to leave, we understand it, but I hope you'll want to stay to hear the answers. One point, just quickly, you talk about demolitions. Evictions, which is an incredibly emotive issue as well, certainly is picked up in the press over here. Could you say a word or two about how evictions are carried out, in particular over housing where former Jewish families have come back and thought, oh, this was a house that belonged to our family in the past, the courts have recognised it. Is there a parity on those sort of eviction-type decisions compared to Palestinians who perhaps have been evicted from property of theirs in other parts of Israel who are not able to return? So something about evictions would be very helpful. And second, you said about divided cities not working. The security barrier, the security wall. Could you say a word or two about what that's doing to the city of Jerusalem, its impact, certainly on your vision for it? The identity cards are kind of part of, linked into this as well. So you've got 5 issues there.
Yeah. Believe me, I have more.
I'm sure.
Well, the ultra-Orthodox relationship in Jerusalem is very challenging. Part of the coalition agreement is upgrading the quality of life of ultra-Orthodox in their neighborhoods and communities, side by side to upgrading quality of life of the general public's quality of life in their own neighborhoods, side by side to the Arabs, and upgrading their quality of life in their own communities and neighborhoods. The strategy is, it's not zero-sum game. And it took me some time to convince them that I'm serious in seeking this win-win deal. And when it happened, it sticks. It sticks in the way that we had some issues on the border between different neighborhoods and Eruv and all kinds of questions that you need a lot of trust to complete. It's not that they like every decision eventually I make. We had a bit of crisis when I opened up a parking lot right next to Jaffa Gate. And 5% of the ultra-Orthodox community, which is 2% of the city, had a serious problem with it. They were concerned that this will have a ripple effect on other things, and I said, no, it's a local point, it's a security problem, we have to solve the problem of parking because it's problematic that everyone parks and blocks the streets, and it's a recommendation from the police. And after a while, they understand that indeed what I said is what we mean. The relationship with the ultra-Orthodox, in my mind, is very good because I care about them and I want them to become successful in the city. And they understand that when they come with reasonable requests, we go forwards with it. And so I think that I anticipate that this kind of strategy of managing the city openly with them, no surprises. I will never surprise them, and I ask them not to surprise me with things that all kinds of things that are, and we. There's a liberty for all the members of the municipality, of my municipal government, that they can raise any point they want on the table for discussion. It's not that eventually, if in Jerusalem you have to eventually walk between the drops, you do nothing. You have to make decisions. You have to have a spine derived from a strategy. We do. And eventually the relationship with them is very good. The relationship with the US of A and European Union, from my perspective, we're a democracy in the Middle East. What we are having today, the world will have in 10, 20 years, and terror is a good example of that. Israel suffered terror decades, and we dealt with it, and terror is a global problem today. Some of the problems that are touching Israel today, we are now expanding our solutions to the rest of the world of how to deal with a better world. I think that let's not confuse disagreements with strategy. There's no doubt in my mind that Israel and the United States and European Union align interest with understanding that we must bring democracy to the world, and eventually, even if we don't agree on everything, we have to make sure that the relationship is in the right direction. And I think, between every married couple I know, sometimes there are disagreements. Fine. I have to admit, sometimes I had disagreements with my wife, but the relationship is excellent. And eventually, you have to overcome those differences. Not necessarily agree on everything, but get our strategy right. The budget, the municipal budget, is a bit more complex than you see in a single report here and there. Since I came into office, I've pushed more and more, both on percentage and on absolute numbers, the investments needed in Arab neighborhoods. Now, one of the things people are not aware of, when you buy a new apartment in a new neighborhood, then the price of the house you pay for development. Now, what happens when you build a neighborhood illegally? You don't pay for the land. The municipality didn't charge you anything for developing your neighborhood, and some of the neighborhoods, there's no infrastructure because nobody collected capital from the current residents. It's a big problem because if we go and develop and put money and capital from the municipality, we'll get a law Supreme Court from somebody that already paid for his development in another neighborhood. And so one of the challenges we have is how do we collect capital to invest in the infrastructure that we collect from the residents by law. It's a big challenge of how to expand the capital that we have to invest in East Jerusalem, in neighborhoods that were built illegally. I'm committed to try and solve it. We will solve it, both by chipping in a little bit more from the municipality, getting some philanthropy. And again, when we talk about bringing carrots to the Middle East versus bringing sticks, that's another example how the European Union and England could help and chip in. It's a poor community, and I will welcome investments in that community rather than charge them, and they don't have a lot of the capital to develop the neighborhood, to seek different sources of capital to help close those gaps. Now, evictions. I want to make sure we are speaking on the same page. If somebody builds an illegal house and the house has to be restored to the prior, there are no evictions. If people have to find legal solutions. Now, if you're specifically talking about Sheikh Jarrah,
Yes.
I don't know if you're familiar with the facts of Sheikh Jarrah. Sheikh Jarrah, after '67, it was always owned by the places we're talking about were always owned by Jews, and after '67, Arabs went in to live there, and they paid rent for decades. They paid rent to their Jewish landlords, and a few years back, they decided to stop paying rent. Has nothing to do with the municipality. It's between the residents and the landlords. The landlords went to court, and they said, these guys are paying rent for years, they stopped paying rent, we want them out. They went to the courts and won the courts, the Supreme Court. It has nothing to do with the Israeli government or the municipality. And now, with two residents have a problem, they go to courts, and the courts decide who is right and who's wrong. And now the people that live there have to were evacuated from their homes, and the landlords decided to give it to somebody else, to do a deal with somebody else. It has nothing to do with the government or the municipality. And if there's a debate like this happens in the center of London, between Jews and themselves, between Arabs and themselves, between Christians and Muslims, the municipality has nothing to do with it. And we're not obliged, or not do I feel comfortable taking sides in this issue, once the court's decided. And last but not least...
Please, your question was about the equivalency of those evictions with the dispossession of Palestinian Arabs in what is now Israel.
Yep, that was... Well, I made that point of the question. He's giving me a different answer, which is this has nothing to do with the dispossession part, because it's to do with the rental issue. Therefore, I'm hard known how to push it. You can think of a way of how to push that question.
You want a follow-up question? I'll be happy to answer.
No, but on that issue, I'm wondering how else...
If you feel that there is no equivalency, and that there is no irony in the contrast between those two situations, if you honestly believe that, then okay, that makes your position clear, and then I think we fully understand you.
I'm not sure I understand.
In other words, the point being that evictions that were taking place of Palestinians who have been unable to return to their homes in former areas.
You speak English better than I speak Hebrew. This concept of win-win, your concept of win-win I find strange. Israel has taken 78% of the land of Palestine in 1948, a further 100% in 1967. You've annexed Jerusalem into Israeli law, and you say it's unacceptable to consider an alternative, and you're going to come on and talk about the separation wall. I can't, we don't seem to be speaking the same language. I don't see how that is win-win.
Okay. You can answer the separation wall within the answer to that question.
Okay. There was no Palestine before Israel. There was no Palestinian state before Israel. There was the land of Israel. It was Jordanian. It was British. It was not a state before.
Okay, hold on. Just let him answer the question, because you made different views. Please, ma'am.
Right. Back to the security wall question that you asked me.
Yeah, you better go.
Yeah.
I'll be done.
Okay. Maybe this will be the last question.
It is the last question, definitely.
The wall around the city of Jerusalem is built to save lives. And when I was unfortunately in a number of places where there was suicide bombing in the city of Jerusalem, and I saw the blood in the streets, and they asked me then, and I'm telling you now, life is more important than quality of life. I'm fully aware of the fact that the wall deters and makes life difficult for people to cross. It's a challenge that I'd be happy to get rid of once there's real peace. And I don't view the wall beneficial, but for one thing, for saving lives. And indeed, if you ask the security forces of the country, you will find that indeed it had a very positive effect on securing people's lives. And so my view on it is I would love to see it fall. And we have to wait for the right opportunity so that we feel that there's the risk associated with getting it down is negligent relative to the gains. And that's the strategy, and I believe that the Israeli government holds the same strategy.
Look, you've given us a lot of your time, Nir Barkat. You've gone on for an hour and a quarter and answered a huge amount of questions in a great amount of detail. Let me say there's no doubt about, as you said, your passion for the city and certainly for your vision for the city as well, and I appreciate very much you sharing it with everyone here at Chatham House. I think, as you can tell, the sense of the legitimacy question behind the broader relationship between Israelis and Palestinians is corrosive of an ability to come to agreement and understanding of how the vision will work. But we have no doubt about it. We wish you success in that striving, and thank you very much everyone for coming, for asking very thoughtful questions.
Thank you, and we're happy to visit. We're happy to see you in Jerusalem next year.
If I could please ask you to, I'm going to try and, was the quicker to head that way? Okay, because we need to get you up to a car with late breakfast.
Thank you very much.